My girlfriend said, "Your friends are a bad influence. Cut them off." I replied, "If you say so." Then I invited my friends over for one last goodbye party and broke up with her at midnight in front of everyone. She's now begging me to undo it. I, 29M, thought I'd found the perfect relationship. After 2 years together, everything seemed to be falling into place. We lived together in my apartment, split expenses fairly, and I genuinely believed we were building something meaningful. That illusion shattered last Tuesday when she delivered an ultimatum that changed everything. She sat me down after dinner with that serious expression I'd learned to dread. She told me my friends were toxic influences who were holding me back from reaching my potential. She listed every perceived flaw, how they encouraged my gaming hobby instead of pushing me toward more productive pursuits, how they made crude jokes that she found offensive, how they represented everything immature about my past that I needed to leave behind. The final blow came when she said I had to choose between them and her, because she couldn't watch me waste my life surrounded by people who didn't want what was best for me. I sat there processing her words, feeling something cold settle in my chest. These weren't random acquaintances she was asking me to abandon. We'd been tight since college, weathered job losses together, celebrated each other's successes, and been each other's support system through family deaths and breakups. They'd welcomed her into our group initially, included her in game nights and birthday celebrations, treated her with nothing but respect despite her obvious disdain for our interests. My mind flashed to specific moments she'd conveniently forgotten. When I was laid off 8 months ago, they helped me network and even offered financial support. When my father had his heart attack, they drove 3 hours to sit with me in the hospital waiting room. When she and I had hit a rough patch last spring, they encouraged me to work things out rather than just walk away. These were the toxic influences she wanted eliminated from my life. I looked at her expectant face and felt something click into place. Instead of arguing or trying to reason with her, I simply nodded and told her she was absolutely right. If she felt that strongly about it, then clearly I needed to cut them off. Her surprised smile told me she hadn't expected such easy compliance, but she quickly covered it with satisfaction at finally getting her way. That night, while she slept beside me, I lay awake formulating a plan. She wanted me to end these friendships that meant everything to me, to isolate myself from the people who'd proven their loyalty repeatedly. She was so confident in her control over me that she'd overplayed her hand, never considering that there might be consequences for her manipulation. The next morning I started making calls. I told each friend privately that I was planning something special for the weekend, a goodbye party that would give us proper closure. I asked them to trust me and play along with whatever happened, explaining that I needed to handle something important and would fill them in later. They were confused but agreed to come Saturday night. I spent the week acting like the compliant boyfriend she thought she'd successfully molded. I thanked her for opening my eyes to how my friends were holding me back. I agreed that cutting them off was necessary for our future together. I even asked for her help planning what I called a transition dinner for Saturday night, telling her it would be easier to end things if she were there to support me through the difficult goodbye. She was thrilled to help orchestrate what she believed would be my friend's dismissal from our lives. She suggested I make a speech about outgrowing old relationships and focusing on mature adult priorities. She picked out my clothes for the evening and coached me on staying strong if they tried to guilt me into changing my mind. Her satisfaction at finally getting everything she wanted was almost nauseating to watch. Saturday evening arrived with October air crisp enough to require jackets. I'd prepared my apartment carefully, moving furniture to create more space and stocking up on everyone's favorite drinks and snacks. When my friends started arriving around 7, their confusion was obvious despite their attempts to act normal. She greeted each of them with false warmth, playing the supportive girlfriend role perfectly. There were 6 of them total, friends I'd accumulated over nearly a decade of shared experiences. They settled into familiar spots around my living room, making comfortable conversation while shooting me questioning glances. She positioned herself beside me on the couch, her hand possessively on my arm as she smiled at the group she thought would soon be permanently excluded from our lives. I let the evening progress naturally for a few hours. We played some card games, shared stories, laughed at inside jokes that made her roll her eyes. She occasionally squeezed my arm and gave me meaningful looks, clearly wondering when I was going to begin the friendship termination speech she'd helped me plan. I kept telling her I was working up to it, that timing was important for something this significant. As the clock approached midnight, I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. The room quieted as 6 pairs of curious eyes turned toward me. She straightened beside me, her anticipation practically radiating as she prepared to witness my sacrifice of these relationships on the altar of our future together. I took a deep breath and began speaking. I told my friends how much their friendship had meant to me over the years, how they'd supported me through every major life event and challenge. I thanked them for being the kind of people who showed up when things got difficult, who celebrated successes without jealousy, who accepted me exactly as I was without trying to change fundamental parts of my personality. She nodded approvingly beside me, clearly thinking this was leading to the goodbye she'd orchestrated. Her smile started to fade as I continued talking about how rare true friendship was, how important it was to recognize and protect relationships built on genuine care rather than control. Then I turned to look directly at her. I told her that after careful consideration, I'd realized she was absolutely right about needing to cut toxic influences from my life. I said I'd identified the person who was trying to isolate me from people who genuinely cared about my well-being, who was attempting to control my relationships and reshape my personality to fit her narrow vision of who I should become. The color drained from her face as understanding dawned. I continued speaking calmly, explaining to the room that she'd given me an ultimatum demanding I choose between her and my friends. I said that kind of manipulation and control had no place in a healthy relationship, and I was grateful she'd forced me to recognize how incompatible we actually were. I told her our relationship was over, effective immediately. I asked her to pack her things and leave my apartment, since her name wasn't on the lease and she had no legal right to stay. The room was completely silent except for the sound of her sharp intake of breath. She stared at me in shock for several long seconds before the reality of what was happening fully hit her. She started arguing frantically, claiming I was misunderstanding her motivations. She insisted she'd only wanted what was best for me, that my friends were indeed holding me back from reaching my full potential. She accused me of ambushing her and making a scene instead of discussing this privately like mature adults. I remained calm while she spiraled into increasingly desperate explanations. I reminded her that she'd been the one to create this situation by demanding I abandon important relationships. I told her that anyone who truly loved me would never ask me to choose between them and my friends, would never try to isolate me from my support system. My friends sat frozen, clearly unsure whether to intervene or give us privacy. I addressed them directly, explaining that she'd spent months criticizing them behind their backs and had finally demanded their complete removal from my life. I apologized for not defending them sooner and for allowing her to create tension in our group dynamic. She tried a different approach, softening her voice and reaching for my hand. She said we could work through this misunderstanding, that maybe she'd been too hasty in asking me to cut them off completely. She suggested we could find a compromise that worked for everyone involved. I stepped away from her reaching hands and told her there was no compromise to be found. I explained that her willingness to manipulate me into abandoning loyal friends revealed something fundamental about her character that I couldn't overlook. I said trust, once broken in such a calculated way, couldn't be easily repaired. She looked around the room at my friends' uncomfortable faces, clearly hoping someone would advocate for her position. When no one spoke up, she turned back to me with tears starting to form. She accused me of being cruel and vindictive, of humiliating her in front of people who had never liked her anyway. I corrected her assumption, pointing out that my friends had always treated her respectfully despite her obvious disdain for them. I told her the humiliation she felt was simply the natural consequence of her own choices and actions. I reminded her that she'd been perfectly willing to humiliate me by forcing me to abandon meaningful friendships in front of these same people. The argument continued for another 20 minutes, with her cycling through various tactics trying to change my mind. She alternated between anger, bargaining, and tearful pleas. She promised to be more accepting of my friends, claimed she'd been stressed about other things and had taken it out on them unfairly, insisted that 2 years together meant something and deserved another chance. I remained unmoved by each approach. I told her that ultimatums were relationship killers, that anyone willing to issue them had already demonstrated they viewed the relationship as a power struggle rather than a partnership. I said her first instinct when she felt insecure had been to try controlling me rather than addressing her own issues, which showed incompatible approaches to conflict resolution. Eventually, she realized I wasn't going to change my mind and stormed out, slamming the door behind her. The silence that followed felt deafening until one of my friends finally spoke up to ask if I was okay. I assured them I was better than I'd been in months, that ending things felt like lifting a weight I hadn't fully realized I'd been carrying. We spent another hour talking through what had happened. My friends admitted they'd noticed her attempts to limit my time with them, but hadn't wanted to interfere in my relationship. They said they'd been worried about me, but respected my autonomy too much to push the issue directly. Over the following week, she launched a campaign to win me back that was both impressive and disturbing in its intensity. She sent lengthy text messages analyzing our relationship and promising to change. She had flowers delivered to my workplace with notes about second chances and learning from mistakes. She showed up at my apartment multiple times, sometimes crying, sometimes angry, always convinced she could find the right combination of words to reverse my decision. Her friends started reaching out too, telling me I was throwing away something special over a minor disagreement. They painted her as a woman who'd only wanted the best for me, whose concern for my future had been misinterpreted as controlling behavior. They suggested I was being stubborn and unforgiving, that real love required working through difficult moments rather than running away. I blocked her number after the 15th text message in a single day. I stopped answering my door when she showed up unannounced. I told her friends politely but firmly that my decision was final and asked them to respect that by stopping their intervention attempts. Update 1. 3 weeks later, her persistence reached new levels that made me grateful I'd ended things when I did. She created fake social media accounts to continue messaging me after I'd blocked her real ones. She started showing up at places she knew I frequented, always with some excuse about coincidence. She even contacted my mother, spinning a story about how much she missed our family dinners and hoped things could be worked out. My mother called to ask what was happening, and I explained the situation honestly. I told her about the ultimatum and my response, about the manipulation I'd finally recognized. My mother listened quietly before saying she'd never liked how controlling my ex had seemed during family gatherings, always steering conversations away from topics she disapproved of and making subtle digs about my lifestyle choices. The validation from my mother helped reinforce that I'd made the right choice. I realized how much I'd been second-guessing myself, how effectively my ex had trained me to doubt my own perceptions and reactions. Her current behavior was simply an escalation of the same controlling tendencies that had led to our breakup. My friends organized a guy's trip for the following weekend, something they'd suggested multiple times during my relationship that I'd always declined due to her disapproval. We went camping in the mountains, spent 3 days hiking and talking around campfires, reminded ourselves of the easy camaraderie that had been missing from our group dynamic for months. Update 2. A month after the breakup, I received a call from an unknown number that turned out to be her sister. She asked if we could meet for coffee to discuss the situation, claiming she had important information I needed to hear. Despite my better judgment, curiosity got the better of me, and I agreed to meet. Her sister revealed something that made my blood run cold. She told me my ex had used the same isolation tactics in her previous long-term relationship, gradually convincing her boyfriend to cut off his friends and family members one by one until he was completely dependent on her for social connection. That relationship had ended when he'd finally realized what was happening and left town entirely to escape her influence. The sister seemed genuinely concerned about her siblings' patterns, but also conflicted about betraying family loyalty. She said she'd watched the same manipulation playbook being used on me and had hoped I'd recognize it before it progressed further. She admitted she'd been relieved when she heard about our breakup because it meant I'd avoided the complete isolation her previous boyfriend had endured. This conversation shifted my perspective entirely. What I'd interpreted as relationship insecurity was actually calculated manipulation based on proven techniques. The ultimatum about my friends hadn't been an emotional outburst, but rather a strategic move in a longer campaign to gain complete control over my social connections. I thanked her sister for the warning and asked her to tell my ex to stop contacting me entirely. I explained that I was considering involving law enforcement if the harassment continued. The sister promised to relay the message, but warned me that previous attempts to reason with her had been unsuccessful. Update 3. 2 months post-breakup, the harassment finally stopped, but only because she'd found a new target. Through mutual acquaintances, I learned she'd started dating someone new with remarkable speed. The relationship followed a familiar pattern: immediate intensity, constant togetherness, and gradual isolation from his existing social circle. I felt obligated to warn him, but struggled with whether intervention was appropriate or if it would be perceived as jealousy from an ex-boyfriend. I ultimately decided that direct contact would likely backfire and settled for asking mutual friends to keep an eye on the situation and offer support if needed. My own life had improved dramatically in her absence. My friendships deepened without constant criticism and manipulation. I rediscovered interests and hobbies I'd gradually abandoned under her influence. I started dating again, this time with much clearer boundaries and red flags to watch for. The experience taught me valuable lessons about recognizing manipulation tactics and trusting my instincts when someone's behavior felt wrong. I learned that healthy relationships enhance rather than restrict your existing connections, that partners who genuinely care about you don't issue ultimatums designed to isolate you from support systems. Looking back, I'm grateful for that ultimatum. It forced a confrontation I might have avoided indefinitely otherwise, revealing incompatibilities that would have only grown worse over time. Her attempt to control me by eliminating my friends backfired spectacularly, freeing me from a relationship that was slowly strangling my autonomy. The midnight breakup might have seemed dramatic, but it served an important purpose beyond just ending things publicly. It demonstrated to my friends that I valued them enough to choose them over someone who demanded their elimination. It showed that manipulation tactics don't always work, that some people will call your bluff when you overplay your hand. She's still with her new boyfriend as far as I know, probably working through the same playbook that failed with me. I hope he's stronger than her previous victims, that he recognizes the warning signs before she succeeds in isolating him completely. But that's not my responsibility anymore. I'm just grateful I recognized the manipulation before it was too late, grateful my friends were understanding enough to forgive my temporary blindness to what was happening. The revenge wasn't planned as revenge initially, but it ended up being the perfect response to someone who thought she could manipulate me into abandoning the people who actually cared about my well-being. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be controlled. If you'd like to see more stories like this, a gentle tap on the subscribe button would mean the world to us. Please subscribe.